Rainer, allow me to call you Rainer.
Hi, hello.
Alles gut? I do appreciate your book and your works, Mr. Zitelmann. Thank you very much, Mr. Zitelmann. It was a great pleasure. Muito boa noite, bem-vindos. Quando ser de esquerda dava cadeia, ninguém era. Agora que dá prêmio, todo mundo é. A frase do poeta Ferreira Goulart e foi uma resposta à grita geral depois que ele rompeu com o socialismo em todas as suas formas e reconheceu o capitalismo como o sistema, entre aspas, invencível. Não me atrevo a perguntar se hoje ser de esquerda dá prêmio ou cadeia, mas vivo estivesse, o velho comuna Goulart seria agora taxado de direitista, no mínimo. A queda do Muro de Berlim e o fim da União Soviética marcaram o funeral do socialismo real, mas ainda existem socialistas e, mesmo independente deles, a discussão sobre intervenção estatal na economia ainda se impõe. O capitalismo se comprovou como o grande gerador de riqueza, mas há mais do que suspeitas sobre sua capacidade de distribuir essa riqueza. Para complicar, a experiência histórica mostra que quanto mais governo na economia, menos desenvolvimento. Nosso convidado de hoje foi maoísta na juventude, defendeu o comunismo até chegar à universidade e se perceber cercado pelo monopólio do pensamento de esquerda na academia. Doutor em História e Ciência Política, ele hoje afirma no título garrafal de seu livro: "O capitalismo não é o problema, é a solução". A conversa hoje é com Rainer Zitelmann, um dos pensadores liberais mais influentes do momento. Wie geht's, Herr Zitelmann? Alles gut?
I see you speak a little bit German.
I regret badly I don't. I have the German citizenship because my parents fled from Germany because of the war. So I had the I have the passport, but I cannot speak the language, unfortunately.
So your parents, where do they come from?
My father came from Breslau, which is now Wrocław in Silesia, and my mother from Berlin, from Zehlendorf.
It's close to me. I live here in Berlin. I'm right now in Berlin.
I do appreciate your book and your works, Mr. Zitelmann. I think it's very, very welcome.
This book, yes?
Yeah, that's it. But I read the other ones as well. I read the one about the rich, and I think it's incredible. So we can start. Today you write books and you travel around the world preaching the virtues of capitalism. But when you were young, as it happens to most youngsters, you were a communist, a Maoist. Why is leftism so attractive, so common among young people?
Yes, a good question. It's correct. And yes, you young people want to change the world. Young people want to improve something. And I think with this is nothing wrong if you want to improve something and change the world. But young people also, they have sometimes this rebellious instinct against your parents. But I have to tell, my parents were leftist, but not so far left, of course, but more social democrats. And so I had only two opportunities. One would have been to be extreme right-wing, what I have not, and the other one was like extreme left-wing to provoke my father with this. And I think this is with a lot of, and I think the problem is when you are young, sometimes you believe in a utopia, in a perfect society. And then you compare the society you're living in and you see a lot of things that doesn't go well. But of course, it's not really fair to compare the society you live in with a perfect society. I tell people always, it's the same if you would compare your real life marriage with a love novel, for example, where, people or the husband and the wife kiss every morning and everything is perfect. Of course, then every marriage would be bad. And this is sometimes young people tend to.
That's right. And when you got to university, what was decisive for you to change sides, let's say, the study of political sciences or a greater knowledge of history?
You know, it doesn't happen from one day to the other. As I mentioned, with very early, with 13 years, I was a Maoist. Then some years later, I was even Marxist, but not so hardcore Marxist. It changed a little bit. Then I started, when I studied at the university, I wrote my first doctoral dissertation about Adolf Hitler's economic thought, about his about his goals with social policy and so. And I saw that the Marxist interpretation of National Socialism, that Hitler is something like a lackey of monopole capitalism, so that this is completely wrong. And so this was one reason when I started to deal with these topics. But even when I wrote my first doctoral dissertation about Hitler's National Socialism, even in this time, I was more left-leaning. And so it changed over the times, and I think it's always changing over the decades.
As long as we are alive, it's very healthy to change opinions, because facts change. If facts change, why wouldn't our opinions about them change as well? But listen, your countryman, Bertolt Brecht, wrote the verse, "Were I not poor, you wouldn't be rich." How would you retort to Brecht?
Yes, this is the really craziest poem I've ever heard. This I don't know how to say it in English, but I know it in German, of course. But we call it the zero-sum belief. So that means this is the belief that rich people can become only rich on the cost of the poor people. So poor people are only poor because rich people take it away from them. And so how would I refuse it? I give you some numbers. In 2000, there were 500 billionaires all over the world, 5,000. Today, it's 2,800, much more billionaires than in 2000. But in 2000, 25% of the people in the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's less than 10%. How could it happen when zero-sum thinking would be correct? So it's mathematical, not possible. Or I give you another example. Let's speak about China. In China, in Mao's time, there was no billionaire. Maybe there was only one millionaire, Mao himself. I don't know. But there was not a single billionaire. Today, you have as many billionaires in China as in no other country in the world. Only the United States have both something like 700 billionaires. In Beijing today, you have more billionaires than in Manhattan, what a lot of people don't know. But this is the one thing. It happens because they introduced private property, more market economy with Deng Xiaoping's reforms. But the percentage of people who live in extreme poverty was 88% in 1981, and now it's less than 1% in China. So this happened at the same time. If you think, why become rich people rich? I don't speak now about criminals, but most are entrepreneurs. If you look at the list of the richest people in the world, most of them are entrepreneurs. Tell you an example of Germany. For a long time, we had the two richest people in Germany. These were the Albrecht brothers. They founded a discounter where you could buy very cheap things. So they did something good for other people. A lot of people bought it there. And this was the way that they became rich. So it was a win-win situation.
This raises the matter of inequality. It seems the call to fight inequality have much more appeal, is more appealing to people than the struggle against poverty. Why would that be so?
Yes, this is really crazy. We spoke about China. Let's stay there for a second. I was several times in China. If inequality is the biggest problem, then I think people in China would like to go back to Mao's time, because people were more equal, for example, in the 50s or in the 60s than they are today. You can measure it with the so-called Gini coefficient, Gini index. Yes, you can measure it. But I met no one in China who said, okay, we are more unequal today, so let's go back to Mao's time. So it's crazy. I don't care about inequality. I think we should care more about poverty.
But listen, Mr. Zitelmann, I'll recap to our audience. Before the advent of capitalism, world population was stuck for centuries and centuries around 700 million people. And then now, after 2 centuries of modern capitalism, we are about to reach 8 billion people in the planet. During this time, science has taken us to the moon and beyond. Lost harvests were saved, billions of lives were spared. The standards of living have never been so high. Nevertheless, capitalism is cursed, even by capitalists themselves. So why does capitalism have such a bad press, and socialism, a terrible disaster in the 20th century, still enjoys the status of the system of justice and arrogates the monopoly of goodness? Why?
Yes, this is a good question. First, before I answer your question, I give you another number. Before capitalism, 200 years ago, 90% of worldwide population lived in extreme poverty. 90%. Today, it's less than 10%. And what is more important, half of this reduction happened over the last 35 years. So it's a great time to live now. But your question is absolutely correct. Why it is that capitalism has such a very negative image? I think there are several reasons. One reason is most of the people don't know anything about history. This is the reason I'm writing my books, like this book here about capitalism. This is the reason. This is a book about history, because socialism looks sometimes good on paper, but not when the paper is in a history book. So my book starts with a chapter about what happened in China with the so-called Great Leap Forward from Mao Zedong. This was the biggest socialist experiment in history. 45 million people died there in China. I had on Twitter a conversation only 2 days ago with someone, with a leftist. And I said, why teacher don't tell us at school about this? And he said, why should we? It's only something happened in China. It has nothing to do with us in Germany. I think we shouldn't tell people in Germany. It's crazy. Would everyone say we should tell people something about slavery in the United States because it didn't happen in our country or something like this? So people don't learn enough about history at school. One reason.